Welcome. And of course, we start off with thanking HaShem, thanking God for giving us this commandment to study Torah, which immediately makes what we do a response to divine command, which means that we are trying to link ourselves to the source of the universe in doing this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And here we are. So we had this statement here that the Israelites say, react to Moses. They are frightened. They're scared out of their wits because they are seeing the might of the Egyptian army coming at them, and they are locked in, basically. They've got the sea in front of them, the Red Sea in front of them, and they have nowhere to go. They basically are trapped, and they are not quiet, okay? So they make this statement. Vayomru, they said, El Moshe to Moses, Hamibli en kvarim b'Mitzrayim? Is it because there's a lack of graves in Egypt? Lakachtanu lamut b'midbar, that you took us to die in the desert? Mazot asita lana, what have you done to us? Lo'otzianu mimitzrayim, to take us out of Egypt. Halo zeh hadavar asher dibarnu elacha. This is exactly the thing we said to you, b'mitzrayim, in Egypt, Lamor, when we said, Chadal mimenu, leave us alone. V'na'avda et Mitzrayim, let us serve the Egyptians. Ki tov lanu, it's better for us, avod et Mitzrayim, to serve Egypt, mimutenu b'midbar, from dying off in the desert. So we left it at that yesterday, and we're going to take a look at the Rashi here. So we're going to learn a little bit of medieval French today. Mibli en kvarim. So the language, the Hebrew, the syntax of the Hebrew is kind of a little crazy here, right? I mean, it's relatively easy to translate, but at the same time, right? Hamibli, is it because there are no ein kvarim, there are no graves? It's still, the Hebrew feels a little bit strange. So he says, Vechi mechamat chesron kvarim. He spells it out completely, Rashi, right? Is it on account of a lack of graves? She'en kvarim b'Mitzrayim, because there are no graves in Egypt? Lekaber sham, for us to be buried there. Lekachtanu misham, you took us from there. Is that the reason? And here's the French. And I'm thanking Svaria. I give Svaria the credit for helping me out with this, with taking the Hebrew and this is French transliterated into Hebrew. So si pour, and then it's faïence. And this is two words, de non fos. I can actually translate it. Is it, I mean, even in modern French, this my schoolboy French, right? If, right, or because, on account of, for, faïence, a failure, right? I think that's where you get the same word, right? For us, right? Fos is a grave. It's a modern French term for ditch, I believe. Right? So it's the same idea. So he tells us the French, translates it as he does on occasion, right? He translates it actually into the medieval French. So got a cute Torah Temimah here. I thought it was worth sharing with you. Because he goes in, and again, it gives you a sense of style, right? Here's Rashi's style, which is just amazing, how he's able to get us such a depth of understanding of the Torah text in very few words. He's very economical about how much he talks. He's right on target, generally speaking. And Torah Temimah is a lot more relaxed about how much he wants to share with us. But he at least he gives us the the actual sources of these particular quotes in rabbinic literature. So it's either the Talmud or the Midrashim or other kinds of rabbinic literature. Hamibli en kvarim. That's the Hebrew, right, in the Torah. Is it because there are no graves? Tanya, This is telling us, this is an introductory word that tells us that this is from a time period prior to the close of the Mishnah. It introduces a source that is prior to the year 200 and is, generally speaking, when it says Tanya, it means it's a source not included in the Mishnah. Because if it were included in the Mishnah, right, this incredible compendium of oral law that Rabbi Judah the Prince had compiled in the year 200, that would say Tnan. It uses the word Tan. So you're getting introduced to a little bit of technical rabbinic language here. So, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, said Rabbi Yehuda. This is not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Do not confuse him with Rabbi Judah the Prince, because if it were Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, it would simply say Amar Rabbi. We have said this and shared this in the past. So Rabbi Yehuda, generally it's Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli, who's also a major figure. Yehuda is not an uncommon name. Ze echad mi asara nisoyot. This is one of the 10 tests, right? That's generally the way in which we translate this. This is one of the 10 tests, shenisu avotenu, which our ancestors tested b'midbar, in the wilderness, la kadosh baruch hu, to the Holy One, blessed be He. This is one of the 10 tests. And the source is Arachin. Basically it means estimations. There's evaluations in the Talmud, and this is page 15 on the A side of the page. That's the front side as opposed to the back side. It's either the A or B. And here goes in terms of and so this is the little note here that tells us that it's referring to this comment down here. So what Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, the author of the Torah Temimah, does is he takes the Talmudic text and tries to set it in more understandable Hebrew. So he tries to simplify the syntax, and then in addition he has comments to make on this, and you'll see it's a different approach, right? It's a little bit of a different approach to what Rashi is doing. So Prate ha'asara nisuyot. He says the details of these 10 trials, right? 10 tests. Yitba'er im yertzeh HaShem will become clear. In other words, he will actually enumerate the 10 trials with which our ancestors in the wilderness tried to test God, right? If with God willing, im yirtzeh Hashem, God willing, lefanenu, ahead, before us, Parshat Shlach, in the Torah portion of Shlach Lecha. This is in the book of Numbers. It's the incident of the 10 spies, and at that point God is ready, after the spies come back, saying that they will never make it, they will never be able to conquer the land of Canaan, and God is ready to wipe out the Israelites at the time. We'll have to wait to get to that, okay? And one of the things God says is, these people have tested me 10 times, is what it says, right? But pasuk, and here's the pasuk, the verse, vayinosu uti, they have tested me, ze eser pamim, 10 times, or these 10 times. So the failure of the Jewish people to trust God in that particular case is the straw that breaks the camel's back in that case. Uvigilion piresh Rashi be'en Yaakov. So there is a collection of the Agadic, that is the legendary material that is found in the Talmud. The Talmud comprises mainly of analyses of Jewish law, right, of Torah law, and deep analysis of it, and discussions that took place in the academies. But there are tractates, some more, some less, but almost every tractate almost, not every tractate, almost every tractate, is sprinkled with what is called agadata. Agadata has to do, to call it legendary material is probably an inaccuracy. It has more to, I would say it's more to do with literary comments. In other words, it has not to do with law, with legal issues, but rather I think Adin Steinsaltz has explained it as theological issues, and that's probably a very good way to understand it. All right, except it's usually done in a very literary kind of way. So, at any rate, this is a collection. The Ein Yaakov is a collection of the Agadic material in the Talmud. And he has, and I think it's Jacob ibn Habib who put this together, collected this material, and has a commentary on it. And he says Gilyon Pirush Rashi means that in this edition of Ein Yaakov there is these Rashi quotations that are on the side. So it isn't that Rashi sat and wrote a commentary on the Ein Yaakov. It's that the author of or the editor of the Ein Yaakov pulled this out. But he adds his own things. In other words, so he uses Rashi because Rashi, believe it or not, also did a commentary on the Talmud, on most of the Talmud, like 95% of the Talmud, which is huge, right? So how he found time to run his vineyard, I have no idea, but he did this. I mean, the guy was an incredible luminary. At any rate, Katav, this is what he writes. Veze Loshono. He says this means, and this is his language, meaning quote, right, quote. Nisyonot lashon nisayon. So he says the word nisyoyon comes from a word nisayon, and generally we understand the word nisayon as a trial, a test. Ve'it de mefaresh, and the Jacob ibn Habib, I think, is the author of this. He says there are those who explain lashon kaas, that actually it denotes or connotes or denotes anger. Kamo vehinam zoafim, and he gives an example that in Genesis, where it talks about the baker and the wine steward, right, that have those dreams, and then just as Genesis chapter 40, verse 6, that when Joseph wakes up that morning and he sees the wine steward, Pharaoh's wine steward and chief baker, he sees their faces are zo'afim. This is the word he uses, and he gives you the reference here, Parsha Vayeshev. This is in the Torah portion of Vayeshev. Ketargumo. He says there, if you look at the Aramaic translation of Hinam Zoafim, it says Nisisin. It uses this term Nisisim, and we understand their words Zoafim as upset or angry. They were upset. That's their faces. Ad kan l'shono, this means up until here is his language, i.e., end of quote. Upirush ze nireh, and first of all, the fact that the Torah Temimah knows, is able to make reference to this particular little section. I mean, the incredible knowledge that this guy has of rabbinic and biblical material. And this is sort of like the length and breadth and depth of it is astounding, which is one reason why this is a reasonably well-studied commentary, this Torah Temimah. At any rate, he says, I think this has some merit to it, the Ein Yaakov's position here. And he says, Ya'an, because the Lashon Nisayon, that if we take this language, this word Nisayon, Kepashte, we generally translate it in the normal way of saying testing, right? To test. Lo yunach bepasuk shelefanenu. It doesn't really make sense. In what sense? When the Israelites were saying this, how were they testing God, right? Like, for example, in the situation of the golden calf. I mean, clearly they were testing God. Shelo nisu, okay? It wasn't that they were trying to test. Rak de agu mipachat haba. They were expressing their scare. They were scared, right? They were scared on account of the coming fear that was ahead of them. V'chein lekaman, he says another example, the pasuk mi ten mutenu b'yad Hashem. There's another verse where they say, were it so that we were to be killed at the hand of God, that God would kill us, etc. Gam kein lo haya sham nisayon, wasn't saying that they were testing God. Rak tsar, they were expressing pain, anguish, fear, worry. Aval lashon kas yunach al kakol. But on the other hand, the language and the understanding of anger. In other words, 10 times they've angered me. They've caused me. They've worked me up. Yunach al hakol. That would make sense. All these examples, if we talk about that they have quoted angered me. Afilu al elu hapratim, even regarding these specific cases, sheyesh bahem inyan nisayon, because we could say these are examples where they were angering God. V'iyen, or just to finish this up, he says, and see further, check out further, lefanenu, coming up, but Parshat Shlach Sham, in the Torah portion of Shlach, in that he's going to say in this verse, remember he referred to that verse. So, and really we know that the term angering God is clearly metaphoric, right? It's not, but obviously the Bible uses that kind of language, and it's not so much that God is capable of these kinds of emotions, or that those are appropriate ways to discuss God, right, in the final sense of the word, but it's saying that our behavior is such that it is provoking. Right? It's provocative behavior is really what it's saying, but it's trying to use language in a way for us to understand. So, for example, another example, which is perhaps more difficult for people to understand, is they're talking about God being jealous, right? We use that word jealous, and sometimes they try to play away the difficulty of that terminology by saying zealous. And it's not, I don't think it's good. I don't think that's a good thing. When they're talking about jealousy, they're talking about loyalty. And they're talking about the same kind of idea that when the Israelites go ahead and start to worship idols, right? It's like someone who's married to someone else and then is disloyal to them. And that's the comparison. And very often, specifically, they actually use the language of going, of adultery when they're talking about idolatry, because it's talking about the feelings of betrayal that a person feels when someone cheats on them. And basically, that's why they talk about provoking God's jealousy, because that's a word that would be appropriate in terms of the kinds of deep feelings of betrayal. And if you've ever been betrayed, if you know what I'm talking about, and you've experienced what I'm talking about, you know how that makes you feel. It's one of the worst feelings in the world, is feeling betrayed, because you feel like a fool. Part of it, you're humiliated, and it's so painful. It's so painful. So, word jealous is okay, and it's trying to give us the sense of how serious these things really are. At any rate, let's go on here. Yeah, we're still back here in this verse. Let's see. Oh, yes. Remember they say in verse 12, they say, isn't this exactly what we said to you in Egypt? Well, Rashi's gonna go straight for the jugular here. Asher dibarnu elecha mitzrayim, which we spoke to you in Egypt. And he's quoting here the Mechilta. We've talked about this before. It's an extant midrash. That's a called a halachic midrash because generally it discusses and clarifies issues of Jewish law. And here's the point. This is what we said to you. And he says, Vehechan dibru. Well, where did they say this? Where do we see that they said it? He says, Yerei Hashem aleichem v'yishpot. May God, this is when the Israelites go, right? Sorry, let's start off with this. Moses and Aaron go and speak to Pharaoh. This is the first time. And what does Pharaoh say? You're lazy. Right? He says, well, from now on, we don't supply you with the straw to make the bricks, and we want exactly the number of bricks that you made before. But we aren't supply, because you got time to complain. This is what Pharaoh's response, right? And the Israelites, or at least I think it is actually the people, I think it's the people, the officers who are in charge of the Israel. They're the ones who are beaten by Pharaoh for not supplying the correct amount of bricks. And when they see Moses and Aaron, they basically say, may God look down and judge you for what you're doing. Better, you should leave us alone. Stop it. Don't get involved because you're just making our jobs harder. This sounds so contemporary, it's unbelievable, right, in terms of human behavior, right? So that's where they said it. Mimu Tenu. So Rashi is now going to go into some Hebrew grammatic issues here, which make a difference in terms of how one translates this. So he is talking about this word here, and these three dots are called a kubutz. A kubutz. It's an oo sound. These three dots on the angle. This is a chirik. This here is an E sound, this is an oo sound, and this is an A sound. But he's going to comment on the fact that the way this is read is mi mutenu, because another possibility, as he's going to tell you, is mi motenu. Now I know the difference between an oo and an or isn't terribly significant, but the truth Rashi's going to tell us is that it has a difference in terms of the meaning of the word. So it's mi mutenu. It has to be read mi mutenu and not mi motenu, as it's spelled there. So here he goes. I'm finding the place. Mi mutenu. Here it is. Me'asher namut. So it's saying, so he's translating mi mutenu as from dying, future tense, from dying in the desert, from going to die in the future. Ve'im haya nakud melofum. And this is what he's calling the cholam, the O sound, not the U sound. And he says, if it were pointed with an O sound, and there's a parenthetical statement here by the editor, this particular editor of Rashi, Rotzono Lomar. What he's trying to say is a cholam, right? What Rashi calls as a melofum is a cholam. That's the modern term for that vowel, the or sound. Kenoda, as is understood, leva'alei diktuk, to those students of, or the masters of grammar, of Hebrew grammar, shekaru cholam melofum, that they used to call a cholam a melofum, ve'iyen lekaman, and he says, check below, coming up, Parshat Yitro, in the Torah portion of Yitro. That's the Torah portion that follows this one. And has the 10 Commandments in it, at any rate. Rashi, and check the Rashi there, but a pasuk pen yifrotz, where it says, lest he break out, something like that. That's what yifrotz means. It has to do with the Jewish people breaking out and getting onto Mount Sinai. I believe that's the context there. Right, so that's just telling you definitions of a vowel sound. Haya nivar, back to Rashi. Haya nivaer mi mitatenu achshav. Okay, we would explain it if it were with motenu. If it didn't say mutenu, if it said motenu, we'd have to explain it as mi mitnitenu achshav. That it would say, it would mean die now. that's what it would mean, and not future, not in the future will die, that we will die. Shinakud b'shuruk, okay? Uh, and it is, okay? Okay, so he's now nakud b'shuruk. So if it's that, because it's pointed with the u sound, niva'er, we can explain me'asher namut. In that case, we have to explain this as we will die in the future. So if it was mi motenu, it would refer to dying now, and mi mutenu, this is how I understand it. He means that it will die, we will die in the future. V'chein mi utenu mut. I'm not sure how this is actually. It looks like mutenu shinamut. So he says, he gives this example, but without the pointing, it's hard for me to say exactly. I'd have to look at this, and it says this in this future place. Okay, mumutenu shenamut, that we will die. V'chein, this is in the second book of Samuel, chapter 19. Mi utenu. Um, I'm sorry. When I was preparing this, it was clearer for me, but we'd have to actually look. I'd have to look in the Torah portion to see what they were, how this, or rather in forgive me, in the Tanakh, in the Bible, to see how they do this. Okay, but Amud means I will die. Okay, and this refers to Absalom. I'm going to stop because I want to make sure that when I explain this to you, with God's help, it'll be on Thursday. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we will not be meeting. I'll make sure that I have all this accurately. So you are seeing an example of where my knowledge starts to pale off in terms of the detail here. So I will go back, go over this, and make sure that I can explain this better. I realize this is technical. It is technical compared to most of the comments that we tend to look at. But on the other hand, there's the reason for going into this kind of detail is because we want to be as accurate as possible in terms of how we translate these things. And sometimes that subtle distinction can have major implications regarding how we understand what's being said in the text. And I will stop here, and I'm going to put a little marking here. I'll take this and move it down and make sure that next time we meet, I can give you a better explanation of what's going on here. And please forgive me. I hope you'll forgive me for not being able to do as good a job as I would like. Thank you. Okay.
Can we see Rabbanan?
Yes, certainly. We will go ahead and say that. And then before I close, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to stop the share. And I need to see 10 people. At this point, I do not. I think there are people who are uncomfortable on the recording, so I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll say Kaddish to Rabbanan.
Thank you.